The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Welcome to BronxTalk. We have sent invitations to all of the candidates for mayor to appear on BronxTalk, and maybe it's no surprise that the first one to respond with an appointment is someone who the people of the Bronx know very well, former borough president Adolfo Carrion. Mr. Carrion will make his 14th appearance on BronxTalk tonight. His first one was way back in May of 1998 when he appeared as a community board district manager. He was a frequent guest when he was a city councilman and then, of course, as borough president. He has not been on the show in 7 years. So we do have a lot to talk about, in particular because he is now the independent party's candidate for mayor. Please note that to ensure balance and objectivity in all of our interviews with mayoral candidates, we will not be taking live phone calls, but you can still email questions or comments to us. And I have the email open right here on the set, and we can try and incorporate them into the program. Our email address is bronxtalk@hotmail.com. For now, a former Bronx Borough president and now mayoral candidate. Please join me in welcoming back to Bronx Talk Adolfo Carrion Jr.
Thanks, Gary. It's great to be here. It's like a homecoming. You know, as I was walking in, I had these feelings of the old shows we used to do and the appearances we made here. A lot of great memories, and it's good to be home in the Bronx. And I see the Halbin painting as the backdrop and the Harlem River and the views of the Bronx. It's good to be
We're
home.
always moving forward. And as I said to you, you're one of the only guests. I didn't have to say where the studio was or where you had to go. You knew it pretty well.
I found it.
Anyway, let's get right into it. Let's talk about the campaign for mayor. And I'll just ask in plain Bronx, Bronx language, what is this about? Just a few weeks ago, your successor, Ruben Diaz Jr., was here and sitting in that seat. He said he was disappointed that the former borough president had turned his back on the Democratic Party, saying that was the party that gave him his career in politics. He was a council member, borough president, even worked for a Democratic president. But you sought the Republican nomination for mayor and are running as an independent. So really, what is this about?
You know what, Gary, it's not really about turning my back to a party that I respect, and obviously, you know, the socially progressive principles and ideals that the Democratic Party represents, I embrace, but I'm also a fiscal conservative. But more importantly, I've always been independent and about results and about innovation and about creative governance. And unfortunately, I think that the two-party system is failing the public. It's failing to reform our education system. It's failing to create a business-friendly environment for businesses to grow jobs in our local economy. And frankly, you know, I'm reflecting, I think, what the voters are feeling, this feeling of disconnect between their reality to educate their kids, to grow the economy, to ensure that they create progress for their families, that there's integration of immigrants into our society, and that they can climb up the ladder as quickly as possible. You know, my parents arrived from Puerto Rico in the 1950s to New York City. They lived the West Side Story. You know, it was not as romantic as the stage presentation of the West Side Story. It was rough. But in less than one generation, they went from poverty to the middle class. They went from living in a sub-basement on South 2nd Street in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, to owning a home in the Northeast Bronx. That city has to continue to operate for everybody who comes here. People come here from all over the world, from all over the country, and they come to New York City because it's a city of commerce and it's a city of opportunity, or certainly it represents itself as a city of opportunity. What we unfortunately have seen in my lifetime and in your lifetime is we're growing hollow in the middle. We're not growing the middle class. We have a city of rich and poor, and fewer people are entering the middle class and being able to afford to live in this city. So I made a very serious and calculated decision in my life after having served in political office as a Democrat to say, you know what, we have to call the question on the assumptions that the parties carry about the constituency. The Democratic Party has largely ignored my community, the Hispanic community. They've taken us for granted, basically saying, oh, you know, they're always going to be there. The Republican Party has essentially ignored that vote, the African American vote, the Hispanic vote. So what we have is people who have lost their ability to engage in the political process because they have lost their currency, their ability to influence the process by virtue of their vote. So it's really calling the question on the parties to say, let's listen to the voters. The loyalty should be to the voters and the people, not to the parties.
There are many Democrats in the Bronx. I'm sure many of those who are still your friends,
overwhelmingly Democratic. Yes,
who would
all of them are my
raise
friends.
an eyebrow to hear you say, "Well, gee whiz, the Democratic Party hasn't supported the Hispanic people," and certainly the Hispanic vote was vital in making Barack Obama a president once again.
It certainly did, and in fact, 71% of the Hispanic vote across the country went to President Obama. And that was a good thing. But that's national politics, and that you have to spread it across the 50 states of the Union. When, you know, all politics is local, and then at the end of the day, when you look at the condition of communities here and you ask, are you better off? Are we getting better education results? Are we climbing up the economic ladder? Do more people own homes and own businesses and are able to show the wealth on their bottom line? The fact is that that's not the case. In terms of the health outcomes and the wellness outcomes in communities all across the city, you have to ask yourself the question, are you better off? What I want to do, Gary, is in the time that I have left in my political career is to really call the question on the political parties and say, are we about the people? Or are we about party dogma?
Would it have been one step too far? Now, you were not successful in receiving the Republican nomination. If you, I mean, it would seem to many people to be extremely discordant to say, "Wow, Adolfo Carrion Jr. with the now we have the I next to your name, but with the R next to your name." Wouldn't that have been going one step too far out of the realm that you grew up in, the realm, you say your parents came to this country, et cetera, et cetera? Wouldn't that have been going one step too far?
Many Democrats are independent, many Republicans are independent. People want to be independent-minded and make judgments about candidates and who they support based on ideas and based on their own interests. Unfortunately, what has happened is many people will vote to toe the line on party dogma and look, you know, the fact is we have in 2009 only 3 in 10 voters came out to vote for mayor. The lowest level of voter participation since 1969, and the trajectory has been a steady downward. There is a disconnect. People don't participate. They don't believe that their vote matters. Look, just, you know, the last term of the mayor was, you know, something that really angered people because, you know, he violated or went against the will of the people. It's time for political leaders to demonstrate courage, go against the tide, and work for the people's interest, not the party interest.
Can you win this? The controller, the public advocate, the city council speaker, and even the former controller who was narrowly defeated in the last mayoral election, all have nice platforms to run from. What's it going to take? Are you looking at a runoff and that's the way that I really have to win this? The numbers for you as an independent against that very formidable set of opponents don't seem to play out.
Well, in fact, you know, it's a perfect storm to have a three-way race. And let me just, you know, to set the record straight in terms of how we engaged with the Republicans in a conversation, I declared that I was going to be an independent back in October of last year, and the Republicans caught wind of it, and they thought, wow, we have an opportunity to do what we did with Mike Bloomberg, which is to do to create a fusion candidacy where the voters have been 5 times over. And so, in fact, the voters have demonstrated that they're willing to vote outside their, what I consider their political comfort zone, and vote their best interests. They were voting for education reform. They were voting for an independent executive that would call the shots as he saw them. They were voting for a safer city. They were voting for pro-growth. My platform, from the time that I ran as a member of the city council, a candidate for city council, and when I ran for borough president, what I said to the folks was, the best social program is a job. We have to grow the economy, and if we grow the economy, we create jobs, and we create the economic ladder that we all came here in the first place to climb. So the dissonance of a fiscal, conservative and a social progressive is where New Yorkers are. New Yorkers are socially progressive and fiscally responsible and conservative. They don't want to go back to the city of the 1970s that went broke and became a dangerous place.
Let's talk about some of the issues and some of the things that you may want to see if you become the mayor. Describe for me what a good development project is. Something that improves the city, or of course in our home borough of the Bronx, either one that exists or one that you would work toward to make happen if you were mayor. What are the elements that make a project a good project that should be supported by, of course, the political structure as well as the people?
I think at the end of the day, if it improves the quality of life, if it improves the economy, if it creates jobs, if it expands the tax base, if it makes the place more attractive for investment, then I believe it's a good project. There will always be participation from the public sector and the private sector in large-scale developments, no matter where they happen across the city, whether it's Penn Station, Grand Central Station, or some of the other major projects that have occurred around the city during our lifetime and before. It always takes the government to say, we need to move in a direction. It makes sense for that community, but it also makes sense for the region. So I think having regional impact is also a very important element.
Did you think that the current borough president did the right thing by turning down the original proposal to turn the Kingsbridge Armory into a mall at that time? Did you say to yourself, gee whiz, maybe he missed that one, or did he do the right thing?
You know what, I think he recognized after he resisted the development as it was inherited by his administration. I think he understood that maybe they had missed the mark there, that they could have probably crafted a deal and improved on the deal that we left on the table, which in my estimation was a good deal for the community. Obviously, it was not fully cooked. It needed to be, parts of it needed to be negotiated. But like any other development deal, it requires leadership to sit at the table and say, okay, how do we close this? And how do we create a win-win situation for everyone?
Do you think that the city of New York and certainly the people of the Bronx have a win-win situation? Or you think we would have been better off moving forward then, and frankly the project would be well along? We're still at least 3 years now before we have anything that can be used at that armory.
The Kingsbridge Armory today would be an active commercial center, an active civic center, and it would have probably thrown off, in our estimation, we had calculated about 1,200 permanent jobs and several thousand construction jobs. The construction jobs are seasonal, as we know. During the time of the development, they benefit the construction industry. There are ways that you can bring local participants, local suppliers, and that's always a positive thing. At the end of the day, the question is, do you create the economic impact, long-term and sustainable, that will benefit?
Do you think this ice rink plan will do that?
You know, it's hard to judge. I think it has the potential of doing it. My hope is that in the end, many people from the region will come here and use it as a venue, but more importantly, not only use it for the purpose of skating and the sporting events, but also use it when they're here spend their retail dollars here locally, which is, of course, a very important element, because if you have that local retail dollar circulating through the economy, you build a tax base, you create jobs. We'll see. I think the other element here is a very important one, and I heard a report today that was very encouraging about this, about the NHL taking on a much more assertive...
that they would be part of the process. So you think that could be the bottom line to push it forward?
We need to cultivate, a growth of the sport in urban centers.
Let's talk about Yankee Stadium, which you are still closely identified with the new Yankee Stadium. It's on your campaign website. Your pictures are everywhere in front of the new stadium. People in the community said the parks trade was not equitable. Mill Pond Park is nice, but it's separated from the community that used to have McCombs Dam Park. Certainly some of the garages are in default, and those are big empty structures on what was parkland. Yankee fans coming in really don't spend any time spending their money that we just talked about, like it would happen at the Armory in the Bronx. Was this a good project for the Bronx? We know it was good for the Yankees. They got their stadium. Was this good for the Bronx?
I think in the end it was and will be, because it's obviously a project that continues to grow. What happens is once the project gets settled, then of course you build businesses around it, and there's a food chain of businesses that sustain the project. But here's the best testimony to me of its success. Several weeks ago, I took a walk with a film crew, and I went down to the park to just talk to people. And I was doing sort of my own,
Your campaign thing.
Yeah, let's document this historic moment. I was part of it. We led it. We crafted it in my office with our planning team. And I ran into this young couple. They were exercising and they were running on the track. And I began to introduce myself, Gary, and as I was doing that, they said, "No, we know who you are, Mr. Carrion." And they said the following thing, which was very telling. They said, "You know what? We were one of those people in those meetings that were protesting and angry about the fact that you were taking the parkland and temporarily taking it away to build a stadium."
Doing some of the things that I just talked about.
But then they said, "But now we want to say thank you to you, because we're in fact in love with this park. We use it all the time. We bring our kids here, and it actually has turned out to be a good thing." So it is difficult always to do development in any community. And the mark of leadership and what some people call the lonely place of leadership is to be able to sort of cast a vision and then carry it out and take the heat for it during the process, knowing that you are going to make some people upset, but in the end, it will be beneficial to the community and the city.
Another project you supported was that Croton filtration plant that is still being built in Van Cortlandt Park. Billions of dollars over budget. There have been 3 convictions for fraud. The promises of park improvements have not been met. Many of those parks still not built. When it's actually completed, the city will have a facility that's running on archaic technology. Do you have regrets that maybe this one didn't turn out as you had hoped?
You know what? It's you never get the perfect, but the perfect cannot be the enemy of the good. And I think we needed to do something for the city's water quality and water supply that was important. It was always difficult and controversial. When I become mayor, we will then ensure that all of the parkland and all of the deliverables are brought to bear, and completed. But no major development project is ever perfect, and that's the challenge.
Although 3 times over budget, this was a pretty expensive, not perfect project.
And I think that speaks, Gary, that speaks to a faulty process of planning these projects on the side of the agencies. I think when you get these over budget projects, I think the Tappan Zee Bridge is now hopefully an example of how to do it right, which is you create these public-private partnerships where you put the risk on the private side. so that the private sector is assuming the risk. They're a stakeholder in the process. They have to speed the project delivery up so that they can make a return on their investment.
Do you regret that maybe you weren't as tough on the DEP to make sure that all this was set before, that the promises were going to be
look, you know, the deal was crafted. The promises were made. We confided in the fact that these folks were honest with the people of the Bronx. The legislature was obviously involved in this exercise. So there were a number of people that, in my estimation, were unfortunately lied to by the parties.
As it turns out.
As it turns out. And so I'm disappointed that it is where it is today.
Do you like the idea, just we'll do one more perspective project, do you like the idea of this fresh direct industry coming to the South Bronx over the objection of many in the community? Fits in with this kind of legacy, as it were, of projects in the Bronx. What do you think of that?
Well,
proposal?
you know, it's a very interesting project, because on the one hand, they're using environmentally responsible and sustainable vehicles. They're local deliveries.
Eventually, of course.
Right, right. And it certainly creates jobs, and it brings activity to the South Bronx, economic activity that is always good, because, you know, jobs are good. I think where we have to be careful is where we have these companies that say they're leaving the city unless they get a deal from us.
Oh, this is what the Yankees said.
Well, in fact, you know, what the Yankees were looking for, they were talking about the west side of Manhattan, not necessarily leaving the New York City. So I think in the case of the Yankees, it's a bit different. But Fresh Direct was talking about going to New Jersey. They, in fact, had already begun discussions with Governor Christie, as the Hunts Point terminal market folks have been threatening for some time. Look, at the end of the day, we need to ensure that we keep companies here, but that we keep them responsible partners to the local economy.
Yes, vote yes. I couldn't quite get that. Vote yes or vote no on the Fresh Direct project. You like it?
You need to craft better deals. You know, I think that's, in the end, my answer.
On your campaign website, you talk about lowering taxes and eliminating regulations as incentive to development. Whose taxes get lowered, and what regulations are stifling development?
Well, here's the thing that I think it really speaks to small business. If you talk to any small business person, and now I run my own business, and I was absolutely floored when I got my tax bill. We have such a tax burden in this city that it's become a disincentive for investment. I met with the National Supermarket Association folks the other day. These are the small neighborhood supermarket entrepreneurs that have really risked a whole lot to be here. They were here when the Bronx was burning and going down. They helped bring the Bronx back. They hire local people. They sustain our local economy by buying from each other, and they create a local supplier network. Everything that they do is local. Unfortunately, they said to me, under the tax burden that they're living now, and the regulatory burden, and the what they consider capricious and punitive enforcement approach of the city, where we treat them like an ATM to raise money. We don't want to say taxes, so we raise fees and penalties. They said, we're starting to shut down. We're not going to be in the neighborhoods anymore. We're not going to be able to hire local people. So we run that dangerous risk of creating the disincentives where people won't invest in New York City.
And yet everybody says, well, wait a minute, we're getting a new BJ's over here, Fresh Direct is coming in over here. So, you know, what do you really applaud, and where is the balance?
Well, look, the balance is to say New York should be a fertile environment for investment. We need to protect local entrepreneurs, mom and pop stores. We need to ensure that those commercial strips are clean, safe, beautiful, that we give them the services that they need. You know, many commercial strips around the city have been forced to create these business improvement districts because the services were just not there. So we need to ensure that we encourage them to be here by giving them the supports that they need.
Do you like what Mayor Bloomberg has done with his version of mayoral control of the schools? There's been an influx of charter schools. They've closed many schools in the names of improving them. There's been an emphasis on testing. In fact, there's been a pronounced war on teachers, as it were. You were a teacher. Are they part of the problem or solution? Give me your perception of what has been done and what you'd like to see in the city schools.
I think the teachers are part of the solution. I think the teachers' union could be problematic sometimes because they fight for certain rules and boundaries, and they resist reform of the way the school day is run, the length of the school day, the engagement of the teachers with the community. I think that in the end we have to create more autonomy for the educators, whether they're teachers or principals. There's got to be a fuller engagement with parents. The charter school model, which is a tiny experiment, it only touches 3% of the kids. People have to understand that.
So the
the
charter school model is good or bad?
No. Here's the thing. The laboratory of the charter school is good because we tested some very good ideas about how to change the school day and the engagement between the teacher, the principal, and the classroom and the parent. What we need to do now is scale the best practices we've learned in partnership with the teachers' union. Scale that up to every neighborhood school, because we shouldn't have families, as they say in the Bronx in Spanish, schlepping around the city trying to bring their kids to a great school, and having these kids who are 10, 11, 12 years old commuting an hour and a half to get to a good school when they should be able, like you and me did, walk down to your neighborhoods, throw on the backpack, go to the neighborhood school, get a good sports, arts program, the best possible education, and the authority of a principal to deal with the resources and the resource allocation within that building.
You're going to hate this like I do. We have time for one more question.
This is good. I'm just getting warmed up.
I can tell that. During a candidates forum last week, you were the only one of the candidates who supported the idea of using drones for security. Many people are like, wait a minute, you know what, this is too far. All the other candidates do think it goes too far. Why wouldn't you rule out the increased use of drones in the city's security?
You know what, Gary, when we have to recognize that we are a target for global terrorism. At the end of the day, if we don't use all of the tools in our arsenal to ensure the right surveillance, and the question that Ben Smith from BuzzFeed, who's a dear friend, asked was, would you rule out the use of drones for surveillance? We know that drones for bombing around the world that the United States has unfortunately been engaged in.
Do people want them outside their windows?
Certainly not. And look, every tool that we use for surveillance has the dangerous precipice in front of it of being abused and overused. Obviously, we have a constitution.
I'm going to have to cut
rights.
You off, and I guess we'll invite you back.
We'll come back.
Adolfo Carrion Jr., nice to have you back on the show.
Delighted to be
here. And
here.
we do hope you'll come back. Win, lose, or draw, we always want to have it.
It's always a win. It's always a win.
There you go.
Thank you.
Folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, you can email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com or make a comment on our Facebook page, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of Bronx Talk, as you probably know, available at bronxnet.org. You click Bronx Talk on the right-hand navigation bar. Also, you can become a fan of us on Facebook. Bronx Talk is Monday nights at 9, thanks to our great producer, Jane Folloro. Our director is former Lehman Lightning Shirley Arrieta. Studio coordinator is Dina. Thanks to Helen, who helped out tonight, and the cast of thousands, and we'll see you next week. Good night.
Hey, Mom.
You know, girls, I used to cheer back in my day. Ready? Okay!
That was amazing, amazing, amazing.
Mom, that was amazing.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings